just a little after 7. First thing on the agenda, of course, are the minutes, and we have the minutes from November 5th, 2018 to approve. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Page 1. Page 2.
One thing on page 2 under number 8, the Lake Iroquois permit denial, the last sentence reads, it talks about the $2,500 for the greeter program and $2,500 for additional milfoil control and beach access. And that would be in addition to an amount that was in like last year's budget, that they are hoping would continue in this year's budget?
I think
they
were
didn't say
asking
that.
for 5,000, weren't they?
I think they were talking about only 5,000 for the
Total.
coming budget year.
Right.
Okay, I thought it was more, okay.
It has been more in the past.
Okay,
I
good.
think they asked for 5.
I'm glad I
That's what I
asked,
recall.
okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Page 3.
So on page 3, Terry, I don't know whether it was during section 11 or 12, or item 11 or 12, I asked for, us to look at some concept of total compensation. We've got some increases again in
We did
health.
talk about that, yes.
Whether it's 11 or 12, I asked Jennifer, and I think I might have even asked Rick about, whether we have a measure of total compensation because we keep on, some of our costs keep on increasing. And I followed up online afterwards, but
Right.
at least during the meeting, I know I brought that up, so.
And you did, so what would you like to have added to?
So maybe just a request for a total compensation review was made. I don't know if you can use my name or not, it doesn't matter. You could maybe put it in underneath 12.
Sure, that would be the right spot for it. Anything else on page 3?
Well, on 14, I also brought up the fact that we didn't have anything in the traffic calming policy that fixed the problem we had with the rumble strips on North Williston Road. And initially, I thought the traffic calming policy was just to cover neighborhoods, but there's new verbiage in this latest one that kind of expands that beyond neighborhoods, right? It expands it to town roads, which is like North Williston, right? So I just wanted to make sure, I'd really like to see something in there. It's not something that the select board needs to review, but it's something I'd like to see Bruce have. If he asks for an engineering report, we should have some policy that says these things need to be in the engineering report. And at a minimum, we should know that, for instance, any calming measures are part of the MUTCD. I apologize if I'm getting the acronym or I don't think I can speak it, so it's not an acronym, but that abbreviation wrong. Make sure that, that we understand the impacts on pedestrians, at-risk users like, pedestrians and cyclists, and then, noise impacts for, the ancillary impacts to residents, right? For instance, the rumble strips on that homeowner. I forget the gentleman's name, but so I'd ask for that, and I don't know if everybody wants to see it, but I probably will not sign it or agree to it if we don't get something in there. And again, it's not that I'm trying to I want this to be a policy that Bruce looks for, or the Public Works when they go out for a quote to an engineering firm, that we at least get that in the report, those kind of things that we want to make sure are looked at and Bruce has a chance to see, or whoever replaces Bruce when Bruce someday retires in 40 or 50 years, whenever that is.
So usually when I have a scoping study, that includes most of the things that you're mentioning. But and we have to approve a scoping study here from the.
Sure, but why leave it to chance? If we're taking the time to write a policy, a traffic calming policy, we should include some policy in there that says, at a minimum, we should look for these things to be in there instead of having every time for us to go in there and, check. I mean, it just seems like it's
Sort of a checklist.
policy.
More of a checklist. to
Yeah,
have.
I think Joy took it if I recall, she took it as me trying to micromanage, but
We didn't want to micromanage.
of course, yeah, that's not our job, isn't the day in and day out management, our job is to set policy. And,
So how would you like to add some
well,
language?
I just like some language added in there that I requested that, some minimum requirements for, engineering studies be placed in the traffic calming, if we do an engineering study, some minimum requirements be identified, right, for the study.
Okay.
And I was, again, looking to prevent the situation we had on North Williston Road, where we'd put something in, we had to take it out because it caused a unanticipated issue, right?
It did.
Yep.
Well, I think there was some things written in the report that mentioned noise, but not in particular for that particular person anyway. And the,
Right, yep.
okay.
So, and then,
we'll add that.
again, the MUTCD, I think we should see, if the engineering firm comes back and they give us a report, they should specifically say, these things are part of the, if we have traffic calming measures, I guess it's measures,
Yes.
that they specifically say they are part of, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's what I would do if I was setting a policy. I mean, I'd want to make sure that we protect ourselves in the future and we don't waste money and
Sure.
taxpayer dollars. And
Sure. So if we add that to the minutes, then that'll give staff the.
Yeah,
Yes, okay. Anything else on page 3? Page 4? Hearing no other comments, all those in favor of approving the minutes of November 5th, 2018 with the additions, say aye.
I,
Aye. And there are none opposed. Joy will not be with us tonight, and I expect Ted will be here, hopefully.
roads are terrible,
Yeah.
so.
The roads are not good, for sure. This is the time for public comment, so if anyone in the audience has any public comment to make on any issue, this is the time. Seeing no hands raised, we'll move on to the boundary line adjustment for Hurricane Lane. Eric, you wrote the memo on this. Are you going to lead us off then?
Yep, a brief introduction. We have
Okay.
Fernando here from the real estate. So Flexa Seal is an international steel manufacturing company currently located in Essex Junction. They're looking to relocate possibly at 291 Hurricane Lane. And they've been looking to address parking there. There's potentially 120 jobs that would be coming to town, and they want to make sure there's adequate parking in the space before making the move. So they've been looking at different ways to address parking before they were to commit to come to town. So Fernando's here from Netty Real Estate, and they have a creative solution they've shared with staff that would involve a boundary line adjustment to create 12 more parking spaces to put them over the top of what they're looking for. And so I'll turn over to Fernando if you want to come up and kind of walk the board through what you guys have proposed. And I can get into the mechanics if the board wants to move forward.
Good, welcome. Thank you.
Hello. So currently, the town of Williston owns this hammerhead for plowing. And what we're asking to do is if the town can give us a land and we'll do an easement back to the town of Williston. And that will give us the 50 feet setback that we need to add 12 more parking spaces in the back of the building. I don't know if you have a copy of this site plan. Like Eric said, they have 126 employees. They're currently in Essex, and they're busting at the seams in the current building that they have. And they've been looking around for quite a while. They love the building. And the issue that we've been having with the building is parking. So the building is empty. We only have one tenant there, it's ASIC North, and they have 35 employees. But they want to buy the building, and with a contingency that we provide them parking. Met with staff, with Public Works, and I think they're all in agreement that it's doable.
It's Fernando?
Yes.
Fernando, could you explain the picture we're seeing a little bit? I'm sorry, I was confused by the memo a little bit. as to
Sure.
I can see the parking spaces, but I'm not clear in what,
Yeah, so there is a little, right here, it looks like a pyramid line.
Yes.
So that is what the land that the town of Williston owns, okay? Because of that, right now, the property line currently is this one right here for us, with a 50-foot setback from that, from
that's
this.
the building owner's property line, or your property line, Eric.
Well, that would be the setback. The property line is right here. But we can build, we have to be 50 feet, there's a 50-foot setback from the property line to be able to build either a building or parking lots, parking spaces. So by the town doing a line adjustment, you're not losing anything. We're gonna give back an easement to Public Works to use this land anyways. But that is the only way we can build these 12 parking spaces that you see here without going over the 50 set.
So basically, you move the property line, the
Right.
setback moves, I guess, and that gives you the ability to put in, okay.
Yes.
I don't know if it's clear, but we currently are not using the hammerhead. It's really the entrance to their driveway. And I think Bruce wasn't necessarily even aware that that was something, but even if he was, it's not, you don't want to dump all the snow from the whole road right in the driveway.
Right.
So we've been pushing it straight ahead.
What it was when the road was originally built, that's where it ended, so it
Right.
ended in a hammerhead so we could do our turnaround.
Oh, of course.
Once they finished the road through the properties, to the east of this, we now just drive straight through, turn around on the other property and come back out. So we haven't utilized that hammerhead in years and years. Therefore, since I've been here, we didn't even know we owned the hammerhead. I didn't know the hammerhead existed.
So you haven't plowed it or anything?
No.
No.
And by removing the property line and then granting us the easement back, we also would like to give up the responsibility for maintaining the pavement there.
Which once again, we wouldn't have been maintaining anyway, because we
Yeah.
didn't know we owned it.
Yeah.
And it
Sounds like a good
appears to be
trade.
part of their driveway, so it,
So there's no disagreement on that, right? Yeah. So with the 12 parking spaces, we still need parking spaces along the road too?
We do, because ASIC North, the current tenant, has 35 parking spaces. And then, so we're still short, so the parking on the road has been very helpful.
Okay. So we still need, and do we know how many, so this just reduces the road load by, I guess, 12?
Yeah, like somewhere in the memo, it mentions that the parking spaces on the road have already been lined. too.
Oh, okay.
You were always allowed to park on the road.
Right.
It was just never
Yes.
designated by line striping.
Right, and I think it's a good idea to line stripe it too, so that's probably a good thing, yeah.
So the question tonight is, does the board have any objections to this? And we can, by consensus, send this back to staff to come back with a full proposal to us and for our approval.
Mechanically, I consulted with the town attorney, and we would look to discontinue this road segment, so same thing we recently did on Chapman Lane, we would go through that process to have a site visit and
Oh, yeah, yeah.
throw up this couple hundred feet of road, so.
So basically,
Fairly
giving up the hammerhead.
we'd have to do it in conjunction with having an easement given, so that would have to be worked out. And they've also agreed to pay for some of our legal expenses in the preparation of that easement deed. That they'll prepare it, and we'll have our attorney look at it. And I don't imagine it would be a very expensive proposition in any case.
So that's along my question, or one of my questions is what kind of it's a boundary line adjustment, which if I interpret that correctly, does that mean there's no money exchanged or anything like that? It's just purely a boundary line? And it sounds like the current owners of the property are willing to help with the legal cost to accomplish this, and that meets your I shouldn't say it meets, you're happy with that arrangement, okay? The other question I have is, so the town will have this unrestricted easement. What do we need that for? I'm just trying to figure that piece out.
We don't want to give up something we generally,
So we had this, we didn't have an easement before we actually owned the land, even though it sounds like we didn't know we owned the land, but we did, and so we had access to it. So this is to preserve that same essential access that we had before.
you never know what's going to happen with this property, that, you know.
Okay. Right, down the road, it could be a different story. That's a good point, thank you.
Right now, we don't have any kind of agreement with the property owner beyond this point that allows us to go in there and turn around and come back out. So if somebody else bought that and said, we
Hey.
don't want you to come in here anymore and turn
Okay.
around.
Yep, fair enough, good, thank you.
Any further questions? It appears that we're in agreement that this is something that we can do.
Sounds like a good idea.
Good. So thank you very much.
Be in touch for now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Rick, any idea when this might go through that whole throwing up the road aspect? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I'm thinking we'll probably have the inspection probably in January, and we'll probably shoot
that's cool,
for
man.
Oh, yeah, of course, please pick a day where it's like 20 below and windy. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering if you might want to have a special meeting, like at noon or something, just for that little piece of it.
That's true, that's gonna be hard for me, but that's fine,
You're welcome to drive out there anytime you want.
exactly.
All right, fine, let's move on then to the Route 2A Industrial and Mountain View Road intersection and the update from the state. I think we have Michael LaCroix with us and Tom Bigelow, is that right?
Terry, did the
Yeah.
DeVita topic
Pardon me?
come off
The what?
the DeVita topic?
It's at the bottom.
Oh, it's at the bottom,
Yeah.
okay.
It's for executive session.
Oh, okay, thank you. I always think the order of the documents I read is the order we're gonna see them, and it's
Oh, yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. Okay, oh my goodness.
Industrial Avenue, one that you're thinking of.
So this is the scope, the new.
Near my house.
Ah, That's one impressive map.
Good evening. My name is Tom Bigelow. I'm from Green International. We also have Mike LaCroix here, and also Jesse Devlin are in Parizeau. Will be presenting, I believe, some other projects there, also from VTrans. I'm going to be presenting on the Williston STP 5517 project, which is reconstruction of Route 2A between the Industrial Ave Mountain View Road intersection and River Cove Road. What we're going to be presenting tonight. First, we'll be going over the purpose and the need of the project, and also giving a brief project history. We'll also just be giving a brief overview of the existing conditions, and then presenting the conceptual design to you tonight. We'll then provide the estimated project costs and anticipated project schedule, and then we'll provide some time for any questions or comments that you may have. So the purpose and the need of the project is to address both existing and future traffic congestion that we see out there at the intersection along that corridor today, and also to improve the safety for all roadway users. And when we talk about all roadway users, we're not saying just motorists. We're also talking about pedestrians and bicyclists. And also we want to continue the capacity improvements and safety improvements that we're seeing that are being constructed right now at both James Brown Drive and between River Cove Road and Eastview Circle. So the project started out, there was a scoping study that was performed at the request of both the town and the Regional Planning Commission. That involved extensive public review. The public was involved in the scoping of the project, and also the development of the alternatives. Preferred alternative was selected and approved by the town. That was done in 2014, and that is the alternative that has been advanced to the conceptual design phase and what we're presenting tonight. After the scoping study, V-Trans contracted with Green International to develop the design, develop the conceptual design plans, and move it forward to final design, eventual final design, and eventually to construction. Conceptual plans were submitted to V-Trans, and that's what we'll be presenting to you folks tonight.
Green International is the engineering firm?
Yes, yep, I work for Green International, and
Oh, okay.
we are the engineering firm. So,
Where are they located?
we're out of Westford, Massachusetts. So,
Thank you.
go over a brief overview of the project limits. We have a presentation board which has the aerial photo with the project design laid on top of it. Just to give a kind of orientate yourself, this is Route 2A that runs across the page. This is Industrial Avenue, and down the bottom of the page is Mountain View Road. North is generally running, the project runs from south to north. The project starts just south of Meadow Run Road and extends 3,500 feet to just south of River Cove Road. And it also starts down Industrial Ave. It's about 150 feet down Gale Terrace, or up about 150 feet past Gale Terrace, and extends about 600 feet down Mountain View Road. Route 2A is an urban minor arterial, so when we talk about classifications of roadways, they start larger with freeways and get smaller all the way down to local roads. Being an urban minor arterial, that's a pretty main thoroughfare for the area and for the region. The posted speed limit is 40 miles per hour, and currently it's a 2-lane roadway, 12-foot travel lanes, 1 in each direction, with 4-foot shoulders, which does provide a bicycle accommodation, and there is also a shared use path under existing conditions that runs on the east side of the roadway and then crosses Route 2A on the southern leg of the intersection, crosses Industrial Ave, and then heads north on the west side of the roadway and on into Essex. At the intersection, there are left and right turn lanes for southbound traffic to both take left turns onto Mountain View Road and right turns onto Industrial Ave. There's also a left turn lane for northbound traffic to turn onto Industrial Avenue. The intersection, of course, is signalized, and we currently see about 1,800 vehicles per day on Route 2A itself.
I'm sorry, that 18,000, is that what I?
Sorry, 18,000, yes.
18,000.
My apologies.
How, well, that actually wasn't my question, but glad you picked up on that. It was more, how do I think of that number, 18,000? Is that a lot?
That is quite a bit for this roadway.
Okay.
You know, when we'll get more into the signal itself and the intersection design itself, but we talk about roadway capacity in terms of level of service. And right now, I believe overall the intersection's operating at a D, but if you don't do anything, that will eventually turn to an F.
Okay.
So, and the level of service is kind of like a report card for an intersection or for a roadway. So.
Okay, good, thank you.
On Industrial Ave, that is a major collector, so it's not as big of a thoroughfare as Route 2A, but it still does see a considerable amount of traffic, about 8,400 vehicles per day. The posted speed limit is 30 miles per hour, and you do have 12-foot travel lanes, again, 1 in each direction, but no bicycle accommodations, just 1-foot shoulder. There is also a 5-foot sidewalk on the north side of the roadway. And as I said, inadequate bicycle accommodations, no shared use path. The shoulders are quite narrow. Mountain View Road is a major collector. So again, it does see a fair amount of traffic, about 5,600 vehicles per day. Posted speed limit of 40 miles per hour. There are no bicycle or pedestrian accommodations on Mountain View Road today. It's only a 1-foot shoulder. It is 1 travel lane in each direction, 11 feet wide. And again, the entire intersection is controlled by the traffic signal. So here we just have some pictures of the existing conditions out there today. This is just south of the intersection. Looking towards the intersection, this is the sidewalk on the, that would be on the west side of the roadway. And you can see the left turn lane and the slip lane that currently exists to take a right onto Mountain View Road. And then this is just north of the intersection. This is taken from the existing shared use path, and you can see the left turn lane and also the right turn lane to turn onto Industrial Ave and Mountain View Road. Here we're on Industrial Avenue, standing opposite the sidewalk. And this is Mountain View Road. Again, looking at the intersection, and again, you can see it is quite a narrow roadway with no shoulders, so no bicycle or pedestrian accommodations. And this is just kind of a typical picture of Route 2A. I believe this is taken right across from the Christ Memorial Church. Again, this is from the shared use path. So you can see one lane in each direction here with the 4-foot shoulders. So for the conceptual design, how we're going to address some of the issues that we have out there today. Again, this is the design overlaid on an aerial photo. If you haven't been able to take a look at this in detail, by all means, you can feel free to get up and take a look. We have in the dark gray is the proposed roadway. In lighter gray, we're showing the sidewalk and shared use paths. We're also showing, in red lines, we're showing where the existing right-of-way is now, and also in red dashed lines, we're showing the property lines. And we're also calling out some key locations for the beginning of project, end of project, and some more design features that I'll be explaining in more detail. Route 2A will be widened between Meadow Run Road and River Cove Road. We'll be adding a two-way left turn lane, which will be consistent with the James Brown Drive project improvements. That'll continue up to Eastview Circle. We will be reconstructing and providing all new signal equipment at the Industrial Ave Mountain View Road intersection. We'll also be installing new roadway drainage where needed, and also providing new stormwater mitigation, which will comply with the state's latest stormwater standards. Utility poles will have to be relocated. The roadway widening on Route 2A will be to the east side of the road, so that's where all the utility poles currently are. That is to maintain the existing shared use path and not to have to disturb that during construction. But again, all those utility poles will have to be relocated, just like on the project just to the north.
Okay, so is it okay if I ask questions as we go through this?
Sure, that's fine, yeah.
If you go back, I'm sorry, you already moved on. I want to make sure I understand what was meant by the two-way.
Two-way left turn lane?
Is that the center lane that?
That's a center, yep,
Yep.
that's a center turning lane. It'll start at Meadow Run Road, and at times at the side roads, it will just be a left turn only lane for the side road traffic. But the two-way left turn lane will allow the mainly it's for the residents and for anyone turning into the church or any of the other driveways or accesses along Route 2A to be able to get out of the main flow of traffic of Route 2A and be able to safely take those left-hand turns.
Okay, but that won't extend the whole way, it only extends.
That will extend from Meadow Run Road all the way up to the end of the project.
Okay.
And the James Brown Drive project also has a two-way left turn lane, which extends all the way through James Brown Drive. And then as you get towards the bridge, that's when the two-way left turn lane will end. I believe somewhere around Agway or Eastview Circle, if I remember correctly.
All right, good, thank you.
So Route 2A will be widened for about 3,200 feet. That is, again, widening to the east. It'll maintain the shared use path. We'll just reconstruct the roadway as much as we need to provide that extra roadway width. And also we'll reconstruct the sidewalks and the shared use path at the intersection itself, because the intersection will be getting wider to provide some of the new left and right turn lanes that we'll be providing. There'll be 11-foot lanes throughout the project from beginning to end. Also, any left and right turn lanes will be 11 feet wide. There will also be 5-foot shoulder/bicycle lanes on both sides of the roadway. So you already have the shared use path, which will be maintained, and then there'll be an extra bicycle accommodation within the roadway itself for the bicyclists on that 5-foot bike lane. And the two-way left turn lane will be 13 feet wide. Like I said, we'll be providing new roadway drainage where needed, and also additional stormwater mitigation as required. We're proposing a dry swale really in the field across from Christ Memorial Church, or in front of Christ Memorial Church. And also, we're looking to provide some infiltration basins or possible bioretention areas. One is at Bittersweet Circle, and another one is right at the estate-owned parcel on the northeast corner of the intersection. Like I said, the intersection itself will be reconstructed, new signal equipment. There will be dedicated left turn lanes for both northbound and southbound traffic as there is today. We'll also be providing dedicated northbound and southbound through lanes. There will be a shared right and through lane on Route 2A northbound. That'll be the right turn lane part of that will be for Mountain View Road traffic. And there will also be a right turn lane onto Industrial Avenue. The kind of the slip lane or that center island will be eliminated as a part of the design based off the size of the intersection with the added lanes that we're adding. That was kind of a way to not make it that much bigger and reduce impacts. On Industrial Avenue, we'll be box widening on both sides of the roadway to provide those added widths. Right now there's only one left turn lane for traffic heading down Industrial Avenue and turning north up Route 2A. There'll be 2 dedicated left turn lanes, and then it'll also be a shared through and right lane for traffic continuing on to Mountain View Road or heading south on Route 2A.
So a question regarding that, and we quite often say this is our intersection. Well, this is my intersection. So, so you've got 2 left-hand turn lanes going essentially north, heading onto Route 2A.
Yep.
Where do they all go? And there's a center lane now, but how do you feed 2 lanes into one?
Well, we'll be widening out Route 2A there, and there'll actually be 2 receiving lanes on 2A itself. And the 2 receiving lanes will carry up to Sharon Drive, just south of Sharon Drive. And that length of 2 lanes in the merge has been designed in accordance with design standards, so that way it's not queuing back up into the intersection. So there will be room for people to turn onto the road and also then effectively merge without there being an issue there. And that will also, by providing those 2 lanes just north of the intersection, that also allows us to provide 2 through lanes south of the intersection. So as you're coming up Route 2A from Taft's Corner, there'll be 2 through lanes at the intersection. So that'll provide some additional intersection capacity as well.
What does box widen mean?
Box widen is a term that we use. We actually have some typical sections here over to my left. It might be a little hard for you to see. So right here, this is kind of a typical section of Route 2A, showing both the through lanes on, actually this is the section that we're discussing with the 2 lanes heading north. And it basically shows how we are widening out just enough for to provide the added lane width on the left and the right side of the road at this particular location. And what that does is that allows us to maintain traffic better during construction, so it's less impacts during construction itself. In the end, the whole roadway will be milled and overlaid, so it will look like one nice surface when it's done. But as far as excavation work to construct the new roadway, it'll just be maintained to the sides of the road itself.
Before we move off this slide, I understood the concept of the Industrial Ave. There'll be 2 dedicated left turn lanes. I also heard you say it was designed to whatever standards are out there. But my concern is that those 2 lanes are going to have to merge. And I might be on the timid side of being a driver. There are certainly aggressive drivers out there that are going to use that to try to get 1 car length ahead, that type of thing. I don't know what the right word is, so excuse my language, it may not be the best term, but how dangerous is that when you're causing 2 lanes to merge into 1 lane in a relatively short distance?
Well, the actual merge is probably about 500 feet long. So that's designed to those standards. So, and we take into the speed of the vehicles. So, the speed limit out there is 40 miles per hour. So we're designing that merge, anticipating that people may be going 45. Okay, so we provide that extra length for people to merge. If we don't provide those 2 left turn lanes, that really gets into the ability to provide the capacity at the intersection. Okay, so without providing those left turn lanes, we're going to see those lower level of services that we're talking about. Or
Particularly
less
trying to
efficient
get
level of
off
service.
Industrial Avenue and turning left to
So
head
to get all
towards
those, to get all those cars to the intersection, you know, if we just provided one left turn lane, to get all the cars to the intersection, we'd have to increase how long the intersection would cycle through. So it really gets into a traffic operations type thing if we don't provide those left turn lanes.
Seems like we have those same situations on Williston Road in general.
We do,
We've
yeah.
converted it to that kind of a situation, and most of those are where you have an intersection and people are turning, so it allows cars to flow maybe without having to slow down for turning vehicles. But you have, and I'm not sure that's that's the same situation at making that left hand from industrial heading towards Essex. So your traffic analysis says this will cause less backup on Industrial Ave. So there's no problem once you hit Essex? In other words, all that traffic will continue to flow? Because it seems like we get a backup, I don't know, from Essex, from, you know, where the dam is, where it turns to 25, you get a backup that sometimes almost goes all the way to Industrial Ave. You don't think that will create more of a problem, or?
You know, this project will only solve the issues at this intersection. But like, there is the, you know, the James Brown Drive intersection that's also being constructed. So with those other improvements within the area, the hopes would be that, you know, you will see a traffic improvement there, so. On Industrial Avenue, the sidewalk on the northbound side will be reconstructed. There'll also be utility pole relocations on Industrial Avenue as a part of that. We're also providing a 5-foot bicycle lane and shoulder on both sides of the roadway on that, for that bicycle accommodation on Industrial Avenue. Mountain View Road, that'll be a combination of full depth reconstruction and box widening. So full depth is when we reconstruct the roadway from both ends, left and right side of the roadway. And that is to help to improve some sight distance issues. If you've ever noticed, if you're on Mountain View Road, it can actually be hard to see vehicles on Industrial Avenue because of the way Route 2A is crowned, and there's some sight distance issues there. So we're gonna raise up Mountain View Road by about 6 inches to help improve that sight distance issue there. There'll be a dedicated left turn lane onto Route 2A southbound, and there'll be a shared right and through lane for westbound traffic to both go onto Industrial Avenue and northbound onto Route 2A, and of course one receiving lane in the eastbound direction. And again, we're providing 5-foot shoulders and bicycle lanes for a bicycle accommodation on Mountain View Road. And I know there's a scoping study that was done, and I think revisit in 2017, done by the town to provide bicycle and pedestrian accommodations on the entirety of Mountain View Road, and this is coordinated with that scoping study.
That's great. So I take it we're, at that intersection, 2A, Mountain View, Industrial Ave, we're losing all of those planters we have now, those gonna? The
planters there, yes, we are, to provide some of the wider turn lanes, the wider roadway, those would have to, in the center island, right there, or the island on the right side of the roadway, that would also go away, yes.
So there's no chance of just moving some of that back?
That could certainly be looked at as the project moves forward, so.
It's kind of a nice intersection. I don't know, it's
Whoever does that planting does a good job.
yeah, they got an horn.
It looks great. The cost of the project right now is estimated at $3.5 million. It is a fully federal and state-funded project, so there's no cost to the town for the project. There may be some ancillary utility costs for some relocations, but those are really minimal in the grand scheme of the cost of the project. As far as the anticipated schedule for the project, we're here tonight presenting the project to the board. We then hope to schedule a 502 hearing, which would provide the public an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments on the project. That isn't scheduled yet, but we're targeting February 2019 for that. After the 502 hearing, we'll be able to proceed to preliminary plans, and we hope to submit that in spring or early summer 2019. We can then start the permitting process. That would start in the fall 2019, and also we'd be able to start the right-of-way process at that point. We expect that to last until about winter 2022. As we know from the Drains Brown Drive project, there's a lot of parcels affected because it is such a long corridor. So the right-of-way process does take a while for a project of this size and with this many affected parcels. Once the right-of-way process is complete, we'd proceed to final and then contract plans, put the project out to bid for the contractors in fall 2022, and then hope to start construction spring 2023 with an anticipated construction schedule of about 2 construction seasons. So with that, if there's any additional questions or comments.
Any further questions for our folks?
Does, well, the only thing I wonder is just the Essex, is there any coordination with Essex on the traffic flow through the junction? Is there any,
As
anything?
far as coordination with the town itself, we haven't met with the town regarding this project. If your question is more about if the signals are coordinated and timed together?
Not really about the signals, it's just, I just worry that if we do increase the capacity, so we pull traffic faster off of industrial, will that cause the backup to happen quicker from Essex, you know, will it? And is there anything they should be looking at to, I suspect you won't be happy if since that's your road there, if the backup happens more frequently, because we can get the cars off of industrial quicker, but now we get them onto 2A and they start backing up. And I know your job was to do the Williston piece, just.
I might be able to help a little bit with that one. So, my name's Jesse Devlin, I'm the program manager for the Highway Safety and Design section. So, you guys know Five Corners as well. That's a very tough intersection. There's not a lot you can do similar to what, Tom's talking about here in terms of expansion and adding lanes. But there are some projects in the works. There's the Crescent Connector that's gonna be providing kind of a bypass, if you will, of the intersection. So there's definitely things that are being looked at to manage traffic on the whole. I'm not saying that there won't be backups, all the time, because there's always the opportunity with the amount of traffic we're dealing with here to see those types of elements. But we are working to coordinate kind of the corridor as a whole and looking at it as a whole. And in terms of kind of during construction, it's definitely something that we'll be coordinating with kind of the surrounding towns and making sure that we're minimizing impacts to the extent that we really can.
Thank
Can you, it appears there's quite a lengthy right-of-way process anticipated. Can you just quickly summarize what the impacts you believe will be on the, residents, or I guess businesses, although primarily residents that live on Route 2A, Industrial Ave, and Mountain View?
Sure.
Are we talking significant need to, I don't know what the right word is, condemn land or expand the right-of-way?
So it will be, I guess, acquired through the state's right-of-way process. So the V-Trans has right-of-way agents, which once the preliminary plans have been submitted and reviewed by the agency, they will then start that right-of-way process, and they will approach each individual abutter regarding the specific amount of land, and then start to negotiations with the property owner to acquire that land. Most of the time, they are able to come up with an agreement with most of the property owners. If there isn't, then it does go to either a necessity or what's called a minor alterations hearing to acquire that land. As far as getting how much of an impact, it varies on parcel to parcel. But the roadway, basically, in order to accommodate the additional width, the roadway will be 13 feet wider, basically the width of that two-way left turn lane. So that's how much wider the roadway will be getting. And then oftentimes the state will take to what's called the clear zone line, which is a line that to basically be kept clear of obstructions in case a car does unfortunately come off the roadway, which we don't anticipate, but things do happen. So it's something that's left free of obstructions, and the state will often take to that line so that way they can maintain it, so.
Okay, and if you don't mind, just to follow up, what I heard is that the road won't push further to the west because of the existing multi-use path that's there, so, which tells me the road's gonna have to push to the east. So it'll be the residents on the east side that will be primarily impacted. And that impact could be 13 feet or so onto their property.
That's how much closer the roadway would get. I believe the clear zone is 16 feet wide, so it would be an additional 11 feet past the edge of the road, is about where we'd anticipate it now. That may change.
So a total of 24 feet?
That would be a total of 24 feet, yes.
So it could be, some people might view this as a significant impact on their property. I'm just trying to anticipate, what we might hear in the future.
It's a great question. We compensate?
The
When you do this,
the state compensates for fair market value to each property owner.
When you say fair market value, just the value of the land, there's no compensation for, I would think that you make their property, maybe some properties less attractive if a car is pretty close to the house.
Well, I can help with that too, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you.
So we do have a formal right-of-way process, and essentially where it starts is with the plan and definition of the rights or easements that we need in order to construct the project. And our right-of-way team starts with either an appraisal or what's called a waiver valuation if it's lesser impacts, to really kind of set the starting point for that negotiation. But that's what it turns into, is a negotiation. So, we present an offer, but there's certainly opportunity for discussion back and forth between the property owner and the state.
Okay.
To hopefully reach an agreement. But as Tom said, there will be a lot of property owners on this project. And typically when we're dealing with a project that has a large number of property owners, it does go through that full process.
And I assume you've gotten to this point, you've looked at all the properties and you think you can come to some agreement with?
Well, so where
It's
we're at.
feasible to do
Where we're
this.
at right now, we really haven't reached the right-of-way phase. Where we're at right now is the design phase. So before we define exactly what we need in terms of specific areas or easements, we need to really nail down the design and have that vetted and, agreed to. So that's kind of the next step in the process.
Okay, thank you.
Sort of similar to what's occurred already down further on Route 2A with the acquisition of right-of-ways down there. And that construction started, and now it's postponed until spring, which it'll be completed. It's unfortunate we couldn't combine all these together, but it's not going to happen, so.
And that's a good comparison in terms of the type of impacts that we'd be expecting on this project as well.
Is it possible to get electronic copies of these diagrams? That'd be great.
If you send them to Rick, he'll send them on to us, and that would be good. Oh, okay, good. Any further questions? If not,
Good job.
thank
Thank you.
you very much. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next highway block, and that's the state transportation project update, particularly on the sort of alternatives, I believe.
Yes, so Tom gave a nice detailed presentation, and looking at your agenda, we're gonna be more of quick hitters. Just brief updates on projects that we have. Again, my name is Jesse Devlin. I'm the program manager for the Highway Safety and Design section. Essentially what that means is I oversee groups that are responsible for the design of projects. And those projects are a wide range, and they are, they're roadway reconstruction projects, intersection improvements, and resurfacing projects. With me tonight, I have two of our project managers who have been involved in a couple of the CERC alternative projects, who I think can speak a little better to them than I can. So we have Mike LaCroix and Aaron Perzo. So before we kind of jump into the projects, I'll just spend a couple minutes on history. I know you guys all probably have quite a bit of history with this, so I'm not going to rehash everything. But as you know, in 2011, there was the announcement that the Cirque Highway, as it was originally intended, would not be constructed. And coming out of that announcement, essentially a task force was created. The task force was comprised of representatives from a lot of groups, including, the town, V-Trans, the RPC, as well as stakeholders for bike ped and environmental groups. So that group was really tasked with identifying and kind of defining projects that would help to fill the needs that the Cirque was originally intended to provide. And they did that, and they grouped projects into essentially 3 groups or phases. Phase 1 projects were identified as, really those projects that were closer to construction, maybe more of a need, and with V-Trans, those were programmed immediately and essentially began work immediately on the design side. Phase 2 and 3 were more viewed as midterm or long-term projects, and those projects also came into V-Trans programs. However, there wasn't a commitment in terms of beginning design work or allocating funds immediately. So that's kind of a brief history of the Cirque. I'm sure you all knew it already, but I think where we can go now is kind of talk through the different phases and the different projects within those phases. And so starting with phase 1, which again are were considered more of the shovel-ready or immediate projects. We can start with the James Brown 2A intersection. So that's Aaron.
Yeah, so that's a project that I have been managing over the last 2 years, and Tom actually made my job pretty easy here. So what we refer to as the James Brown Drive intersection project is actually a reconstruction of the James Brown Drive intersection with a new updated signal, expanded lanes to accommodate that 2-way left turn lane that he'd been talking about, and widening again to the east side of the roadway. Adding pedestrian facilities at the intersection, creating a sidewalk on the east side as well, and maintaining again that shared use path that's already existing on the west side. So this project, as you might know, is already in active construction. So we spent the last few years designing it, and it's currently under construction with a few items that had been accomplished this construction season. And then next year, the contractor is ECI, local out of Williston, and they will be kind of starting on the River Cove side, on the south side of the road, and working their way northerly and widening the road and kind of moving on as they go. So they're expected to start in April, weather depending, and then move on, and hopefully the signal will be up and the roadway will be completed by the early fall. So that's where that project is at.
Can I ask who the engineering firm was for that piece?
Yep, that was actually Green International as well. So there's a cohesion across those design projects.
And can I ask, and this is nothing against Green International, of course, but are there no Vermont engineering firms that we can make use of? Don't they have the scale, or?
There are a lot of design firms that we have on our retainer contracts, and so we, spread the wealth a little bit in terms of who we use. And Green International has done a lot of work in Vermont with us, so they're a very reputable firm that we.
Oh, I have no doubt.
Yeah.
I'm just asking about.
And so there are a few Vermont firms that we use for projects.
Yeah, so we have a list of what we call a retainer contract, and essentially what that means is when we need assistance with design activities, we can reach out to one of those firms. And we certainly have local firms, we certainly have out-of-state firms. And, you'll hear us today talking about just the workload in Williston, and there's a lot that we have on our plate. So we do disperse the work based on need and also, the experiences that they've had with different projects. And I know that the Cirque alternative projects, there were certain consultants that were involved in the scoping effort, and in every case, we weren't able to align, that effort with the actual design.
Are they competitive bid, the engineering piece?
So it's a competitive selection to get onto the retainer.
Any other questions on that one? Great.
You send out those weekly almost bulletins?
Yes, we do.
Those
Yeah.
are helpful.
Great, good. Yeah, we have a public outreach person, Stephanie Barrett, on board who sends out the updates. Yeah.
Yeah, we heard a lot from, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but a fair amount from the community when we installed kind of the temporary signal at the intersection. Some who loved it, and some who were upset with the queues that were associated with it. But we're excited to get the permanent fix in, and you know, folks will be able to really see how it operates with the additional capacity as well. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Mike is the project manager for what was termed the Williston Essex project. So I'll let him take it over.
You've no doubt have witnessed some physical changes to some of your traffic signals in the Taft Corners and Exit 12 area. You have me to blame for that, for certain. So just real quick, what we did was we've upgraded 12 intersections, state-owned signalized intersections in that area. And it was part of a larger project that incorporated 7 intersections in Essex as well. And the idea really was to modernize the traffic signal equipment at those intersections in order to enhance the agency's ability to actively manage our traffic signals. The infrastructure that was out there was 20, 25, in some cases 30 years old, so that's pretty much at the end of the life cycle for a traffic signal in Vermont. So we use this project as an opportunity to modernize that equipment and to bring on board what's called an ATMS system, which is Advanced Traffic Management System, which is software-based, that was housed in Montpelier. And what this ATMS system does is it gives us the ability to remotely monitor and collect high-resolution traffic data from the modernized equipment that we installed over the past year. And our signal operations staff can take that data and analyze it remotely. There's cameras and radios as part of that installation, and the hope is that we'll be able to take that data and better manage, better optimize the timing and phasings at each of those traffic signals, and in hopes of trying to increase mobility and throughput through those very busy corridors. So that was a 2-year project that started way back, I believe, in 2014. The CCRPC had what's called the WENT study. You're probably familiar with that. And that study had some recommendations for traffic signal improvements for the Vermont Route 2A corridor in Williston. So in total, it was our largest traffic signal project ever. At 19 intersections, and still has some bugs that were worked out, but it is complete, and we're just now starting to get the data in from the traffic counters, and we're really looking forward to the future.
So quick question on those intersections, and especially the Taft's Corner one. You know, the timing is really odd at times, you know, just a few seconds for Williston Road. But you're saying the adjustments to those are made remotely, like in Montpelier? Or there's actual learning built into the system? Local learning?
The learning
Built
piece,
into the software at the intersection?
there is a component that where there is like a black box, if you will, that has algorithms built into it. We have not built that into this system yet. Right now, we have the ability to remote in and make adjustments as needed. We're trying to rely on the detection equipment that we've installed out there and see what kind of traffic, data we're getting, counts and other type of occupancy data, and see where we can best make improvements to the timing and phasing manually before we start to rely on a computer to make those adjustments for us. Ultimately, we'll probably get there at some point. Essex, for instance, does have one of those black boxes, and I believe it's at Susie Wilson Road. And it's kind of hit or miss as to how effective that black box is at making those adjustments without a human. So we're still kind of exploring that, but we want to try, the idea is we want to try to maximize and squeeze every little bit of efficiency out of those traffic signals as we can before we rely on a computer to do it for us, or to add geometric changes, so like widenings, adding lanes and stuff like that. So that's the idea. We're trying to keep our impacts, small in measure.
But when you get that short green going across 2A, you can yell at Mike. I do. But
It's
better.
especially with people with the cell phones, when they're looking down. 3 seconds is hardly enough time for them to look up and move, and sometimes you get like one car.
Hey, we have to keep you guys on your toes.
But these intersections, there's so many cars, and, it's certainly easy to say, yeah, a few more seconds here or there, but that kind of change could have significant impact, on the other legs of the corridor as well.
Sure, I just wonder, and I don't want to take all the time, but there must be some theory behind the timing from a flow perspective, I assume, that you
And
built
one of the
into
other
this.
things that this project really does too is it does set us up for the future. And by that I mean, with the equipment that we had out there previously, there was no opportunity to remotely monitor. There wasn't an opportunity for, the black box or more of that.
Machine learning, yeah.
So it kind of sets us up for that future.
You'll be collecting a lot of data in the next 30 days at Taft Corners.
This is the worst time of year, right? Yep.
So I was a little bit confused about where on the timeline or the scale we are right now. Are we at the beginning of this process where you're optimizing the system, or are we, 50% through, or is it, it's still gonna take a while for us even to start to see the benefits of what's going on?
It will take I'm going to speak on behalf of our signal operations crew who's not here today. They're the ones who collect and analyze the data, but they're just getting the first bits of data now, like this month. It'll be an ongoing process where it's just a continuous feed of data that we're getting 24/7, 365. And I would think that once the Christmas, once the holiday season expires and things kind of start to normalize traffic-wise, I think they'll have a better idea of what the data really looks like and then what the next steps would be in terms of optimizing the efficiency of those signals. So it should be, I would say you might see some results, or you might see some physical changes come spring or summer.
Okay, so those were the two phase 1 circ alternative projects within Williston. Moving into phase 2, there was one project, and that was the 2A and Trader Lane intersection project.
Yeah.
So Erin is the project manager for that one as well.
Yeah, so this project on Route 2, I believe, Route 2 and Trader Lane at Helena Drive, was an intersection project with thinking about adding a new signal there and bicycle and pedestrian facilities as well. And it was in conjunction with the town's project of creating Trader Lane and developing that connection back into, connect to Marshall. So we were working with a local consulting firm, Lamro & Dickinson, and we got it up to about the conceptual plans phase, and we were working with Bruce and looking at how they were developing Trader Lane itself. And we got to a point where we realized that with the federal money that we were using for the project, there were some environmental limitations and some reasons that it made more sense to combine the two projects into one. And what we ended up doing is working with Bruce and Lamro & Dickinson, who was doing both the design for the intersection and the design for Trader Lane, and having them progress that as one project that was now going to be state funded. So we worked with Bruce to develop a grant, and once that project continues to move, we'll provide the funding for the engineering and the construction as a state share to him. And my understanding is that project is currently in the right-of-way process, and the town is working through right-of-way negotiations with property owners. So that's that.
Could I just repeat back what I thought I heard?
Sure, yeah, we'll see if it.
Maybe I heard wrong. Is this project, which was two projects, the town's portion, which was Trader Lane, and then the, if you will, the state's portion, which was the intersection, is now one project that the state will be paying for?
The state will be
Is that the
paying
piece
for.
I heard correctly?
Right, well, the state will be paying for the part that we were originally gonna be paying.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah,
Okay, I
for the
wanna make-
intersection piece.
I figured, but you could interpret what you said different ways.
Yeah, no, thank you for the
Okay.
clarification.
And when is that proposed to be happening?
We're working on it, I mean, what
Okay.
Karen said is exactly right, we're in right-of-way negotiations, is the best way to say it. Right?
There's a key property owner and, okay, it's a huge, okay. Yep, I understand.
Where would the road be expanded? I guess I'm kind of confused. The Trader Lane would be extended, is that?
Trader Lane now is the road that goes into Grand Union, or not, Hannaford's, I'm sorry.
A and P?
20 years ago.
Flashbacks.
We can go to Gaines afterwards, too. I did my school shopping there.
Anyway, it's the one that goes off Marshall, Trader Lane goes to, Hannaford's right now, it actually exists right there. It'll go straight through on the Mountain Side, I'm gonna get this one on to Texas Roadhouse. Because I always call, I always call that one Trader Duke's.
All right, thank you.
All right, so moving on to the Phase 3 projects, which are more of the long-term vision projects. We spoke about the 2A Industrial Lab Mountain View. That was a CERCAL Phase 3 project. And the other one that's being managed by the Highway Safety and Design Group is what was noted as the Exit 12 Interchange project. And essentially that project was broken into 4 individual stages or standalone projects. Stage 1 was identified as a shared use path that essentially went through the interchange area beneath the bridges and also included a new lane as you're heading in the southbound direction towards the interchange. Stage 2 was defined as a new intersection that would be located between the interchange and Marshall Ave, and that would connect into new grid streets down behind Toys R Us and Home Depot. Stage 3 was the diverging diamond interchange, which would essentially rework the entire interchange area. And stage 4 was defined as the boulevard approach, which would define more of a boulevard or separated roadway between Marshall and Taft. And
I'm sorry, between Marshall and Taft?
Taft Corners.
Okay.
So our design team has started work on this, and there's kind of another elephant in the room as well, which is the bridges that go over 2A. And you've seen from some of the work that's been done on those, there will be major work that's going to be coming to those bridges. And as we started to really get into kind of the scoping and design of this project, we decided to kind of step back and look at it in a different way. So what we've asked our design team to really come back with is to look at this area as a whole, and considering all the stages of projects and the bridge, to define a recommendation in terms of how to advance this. Because this is really a massive project when you look at it as a whole. And we want to be efficient in the way we sequence work, and we want to be conscious of how we impact the community and drivers through this area. So we've asked our designers to come back and really define the best way to tackle this. And we anticipate that we're going to have that recommendation back early in 2019. And at that point, I think that the board should be expecting a formal presentation similar to what Tom put on regarding kind of this interchange area as a whole and how we'd like to kind of move forward and start to get these projects really moving and off the ground. What we want is to have a defined plan right from the start so that we can tackle it with momentum and keep the project moving.
So I think I read somewhere in the paper in the last week or so that a large commission has been formed to take a look at all of this.
Well, it's not specific just for exit 12, but it's really kind of the, I'll say the exit 12 to 16. It's basically the interstate corridor through there. And it is, you know, it's looking at capacity both on the interstate, but also at some of the interchanges as well. So yeah, that's being led through the RPC. V-Trans will have some involvement in it. I'm sure the towns will be involved to some degree as well.
Sure. Mainly federal funds on this because we're dealing with interstate?
Yeah, so I mean, that's another piece that needs to be worked out too. You know, the scoping effort that was done during the, you know, the alternatives development phase, it produced valuable information based on needs and kind of the desires of the community. But there's a couple elements here, specifically the new grid streets and the boulevard, that still need to be kind of worked out as to whether those would truly be eligible for federal funds.
Do I interpret what I'm hearing is that this has always been a long-range project? We had no visions that it would be happening anytime soon. But I think what I'm hearing, and I'm just looking for concurrence on this, is take that previous understanding of when it might happen and extend it even further out.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So let me give an example of kind of what I'm talking about. So stage 1 was defined as the shared use path. And that seems like a pretty simple project, right? But what we don't want is to move ahead, design that, construct it, and then be replacing the bridge 2 years later, where we're ripping up exactly what we put in. So it's not necessarily pushing everything out. What we're doing now is really developing that plan to ensure that we're not duplicating efforts and we're doing things in a way that makes sense for the overall intersection. So it very well could end up that stage 1 is the first one and could be done in, you know, however many years. But we just want to really define that and understand that before we commit to it.
Full plan, front,
Yeah.
beginning to end, and then to make sure that anything we stage at phase 1 isn't torn down in phase 3 or whatever, which, it's a good thing.
If I could make somewhat of a pitch for that shared use path, and I don't know if it needs to be a shared use path, but we do know there are people who walk underneath that bridge, and it's just not a good situation.
Absolutely. I drive through this area frequently, and I see it, so understood.
Any further questions? We appreciate the updates and
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and there are 3 additional CERC alternative projects in phase 3. They're not managed by the Highway Safety and Design Group. They're actually locally managed through the Municipal Assistance Bureau. Those 3 are more bike ped type projects. Tom mentioned the Mountain View expansion, as well as there's a project that really kind of fills in some gaps on 2A and Harvest Lane as well. So I did touch base with their program manager before I came, and those still are candidate projects, meaning there are not funds tied to them right now. So that's a short and sweet update on those.
Is this written down somewhere, this, you know, the phasing, the projects in each one of the phases?
Yep, yeah, so there were reports that came out of the CERC Alt task force that really kind of defined the phases and the projects. All the projects that I've discussed are in our budget, so they are real and projects within our programs.
They're all included in the tip.
Yep.
and I think some of the other things are on the RPC's website as well.
Yeah, so the RPC still does have a full page that's dedicated to the CERC and the CERC alt process, and it includes things, you know, all the scoping efforts that were done as part of that, and a lot of history on that.
person to ask about the park and ride?
Not exactly. So that, again, that comes through our Municipal Assistance Bureau. As I'm sure you know as much as I do, I understand that there's going to be an extension of the frontage road. And, you know, I think that ties in a few different elements in terms of permitting, and I think it needs to go back through your DRB. But that's essentially what I know. I'm looking forward to it too.
Can I don't want to criticize, because I know that you folks are not the people who are causing any delays, but my recollection is that the town created a whole bunch of committees in 2012. Is that, the CERC was canceled in 2011?
Yep.
And there were the CERC alternative committees.
Yes.
And again, I really appreciate everything that's been going on, but I don't think I'd be responsible if I didn't point out that we're still talking about designing something that we had major emergency meetings on in 2012, and it's almost 2019.
No, I understand that. And, you know, you've kind of heard from Tom in terms of process, and there's no easy projects anymore. And, you know, frankly, where we're working here on these intersections and these roads, nothing's easy anymore. And, you know, in terms of defining, you know, the right treatment, but also working through the process with permitting and right-of-way, I understand it's a long process. But I also hope that you kind of see that, you know, over the next 5 to 7 years, there's going to be a lot of work in Williston. And I am hopeful that, and I'm confident that you guys will start to see the benefits of these projects.
Great. Thank you.
No more questions? Thank you very much for
Thanks, guys.
coming in. Appreciate that. We'll move on then to the noise control ordinance amendment and discussion on that. Rick, I presume you're going to lead this off, and then we'll ask the Gun Club to join in as well.
Pause for a couple seconds.
Okay.
We have all this.
Take them down, sure.
I guess I'll get started here. You have quite a bit of information that's been distributed to you this evening, including a memo from me dated November 16th. There's, I'm not going to go through the entire list, but there's a 1991 letter from the Gun Club. There's a court decision. There's a letter I sent to the club April 2014, and then we have an email, copy of an email that was sent from the club to the town in 2015. The current ordinance that the town has, which is intended to regulate noise in the community, is unenforceable because of a court decision, and I think the board's certainly aware of that. And it's unenforceable as it relates to, specifically to noise generated by the North Country Sportsman's Club, otherwise referred to as the Gun Club. And I did provide some historical perspective. I won't cover that again. There was a Vermont Supreme Court decision that was issued in 2017, and the decision was that it kind of protected the gun club's level of activity based on the historical use and using the May 2006 as a baseline. And of course, the town's goal all along was to protect what we viewed as the status quo. We weren't trying to further limit, at least in our minds, what the club was doing. So this decision was consistent with what I thought were our goals. The problem is in defining what the historical use was, and there seems to be some disagreement on that. An attempt was made by the club to provide some numbers on their number of shooting events over a 4-year period, and there's a chart in my memo that illustrates the numbers that they provided to us, the information that they had. Will say that some of their numbers does include shooting on days other than the days that, Thursday shooting. Normally they would be shooting on Wednesdays, Sundays, and occasional Saturdays. And so some of their numbers, particularly in 2005, I think it was, involved some shooting on Thursdays. I've also provided you with some information on the records that we have. Unfortunately, they only date after 2006, and it runs from 2008 up to the present. And those numbers are based on the notifications I received from the club saying that they were going to have a shooting event. And we've relied on that information because if you recall, our ordinance required that when it was in place, and the club has been, even in the absence of a valid ordinance, have continued to provide us information when they have shooting events. So that's why we still have data going from 2017 and 2018. So, as I said, at this point, the staff is looking for some direction from the board. There is a disagreement. We've had discussions with the club as to the number of shooting events that we believe are represented historically. So I've outlined several options here. There may be others, but the ones that I thought made sense was one option is to develop language that increases the flexibility the gun club has for shooting, both in hours and days. This language, if we follow that approach, would likely expand the number of hours that they're currently shooting at their location. A second option is to add language to the ordinance that mirrors the hours specified in the 1991 letter, and leave the number of shooting events on Saturdays as undefined. I'm not going to comment on any of these, but I think that is an option. A third option would be to add language to the ordinance that specifies hours consistent with the 1991 letter and agreement that we had with the club for a number of years, but define the shooting events as a specific number and or frequency. That's not necessarily an easy thing to do because there's disagreement on what that might mean. And the fourth option is to do nothing, which means we continue to have an ordinance that's not enforceable as it relates to the club. And depending on which direction the board wants to go in, that will guide us into what process needs to be followed.
So that's our job tonight, is to try to give direction to the staff. Bob Oddie, would you care to make any comments regarding the process up till now?
Yeah, sure. Again. Yeah, I just wanted to kick off and address a couple of points in the memo that Rick just gave the summary of there. The first, not quite as substantive, maybe is in terms of determining how we move forward, but just a little bit on the history where the 2014 timeframe, when it's stated here that the select board was presented with a petition for termination of the agreement, indicating that that was on the basis of an increased number of special shooting events around that time. There was a lot going on with the club at that time, club, neighbors, we had some things going on with the DRB, the select board, all at the same time. So I think in the explanation here, there's actually a couple things jumbled up that I'll just clarify. The request that was made by the neighbors at that time was to tie the renewal or the termination, as the case may be, of the agreement that was in place at the time, actually to environmental testing that we were doing at the time and is still ongoing. It didn't have to do with shooting events at the time, and actually, if you go back to the record of events from that time, you'll see that there was no increase. So minor point, but just in terms of how we got to where we got. The other thing as well, as far as the termination of the previous agreement by the club, yes, we did make that notification. Just wanted to point out though, and this is reflected in that email that Rick provided, that along with that termination, we had made a proposal for terms of a new agreement, admittedly as sort of an opening point of negotiation, and the town simply responded by saying that they were unacceptable. That was unacceptable. So no negotiation took place at that time. I'll admit to some naivety about how long it might take to renegotiate that. I think I sent that in early April, indicating we would terminate the agreement in May. So given that we're here 16 months after the Supreme Court ruling, perhaps 3 weeks wasn't sufficient. So, but in any case, that was an attempt to renegotiate at that time. And as Rick indicated, we all know the litigation followed. The other point from an event standpoint that I think is probably more substantive, if this is where we end up kind of going tonight, under the town perspective, bullet point number 2, staff has no way of evaluating the accuracy of the club's numbers. I frankly don't know any other way to say this than to say that's absolutely not the case. So what you were presented with, at least in this memo, and I don't know if any other resources that the club provided were provided to the select board as well, was a much more detailed summary, dates, what the events were, day of the week, and where the record of that event could be found in the newsletters. I've actually got that summary here. I don't know if that's appropriate to distribute at this time. I only have 1 copy. If we do want to do that, so you can either share, or maybe somebody can make copies, or we can. What's that?
Give it to Rick, and then he'll distribute that to us.
Okay.
That'll be fine.
Yeah, he already has an electronic copy of this. I brought a hard copy if this is where we end up going tonight. If not, that's fine too. But the town does have an electronic copy of this. And
My point was that there were several events that we had on our list that you didn't have on yours. So right there, that pulls.
Well, I think that's a relevant point for 2008. I agree with the discrepancies in 2008, but there can't be a discrepancy in 2005, 6, and 7 because the town has no records.
Right,
from that
that's
time.
correct, that's correct.
So
But
my point here is that the way that the club records were presented to the town, both in the form of the detailed spreadsheet as well as providing the newsletters. I did not bring 4 years worth of newsletters tonight. You can thank me later. With the newsletters, all of those newsletters are what I took the records from, so they were absolutely verifiable between the spreadsheet and the newsletters. Similarly, going on in that same bullet point, that it's certainly possible that some events listed in the newsletters were never held because of weather or other reasons. Also not the case. With very few exceptions, the events that are recorded in my detailed spreadsheet, I didn't record them in that spreadsheet as a record unless they were described retrospectively in a newsletter. So in other words, a May newsletter describing an event that had happened in April, for instance. The very few exceptions to that I would acknowledge and are described as such in that spreadsheet were situations where several of the events during this time frame were a regular Saturday 4-H program that was run at the club. And those events, the schedule was typically announced early in the year, for instance, the 1st and 3rd Saturday of each month, or 2nd and 4th, something to that effect. During the vast majority of months, as I kind of indicated, the April event would have been described in the May newsletter, or something like that. There were some months where there was no report either on a cancellation or an occurrence of those. I did mark those down as events, however, I noted there that in the newsletter pertaining to that time period when those events would have taken place, there was no mention one way or the other. So I believe that pertains mostly to 2007, but there are years or time periods within these records that I presented that are probably admittedly better expressed as a range as opposed to an absolutely defined 100%, this is exactly how many events occurred during that time frame. So, like I said, I have every confidence that the records are accurate, they're verifiable, and these are the real numbers in terms of what was going on at the club at that time. So I think that's all I had, at least for the time being, on the memo, unless we go back to other points there. The only other point that I wanted to make is really, and I made this point to Rick when we met, but is that ever since the ruling in 2017, the approach the club has taken is determining how we can and need to operate going forward in a way that complies with that ruling. And to us, that meant that there were really, well, at least initially, one question we had to ask, which was, what is our interpretation of the ruling? What does the ruling say? And I think even from the snippet of the ruling that Rick took and put into that memo, it's pretty clear that the ruling more or less says that the club can continue doing what it was doing in and around 2006. Now, where I think there is some room for discussion and interpretation is the ruling refers to the 2006 time period in a few different ways throughout the ruling. There's the 2006 baseline. So what does that mean? Does that mean in 2006, whatever you did in 2006, spot on is what you can continue to do? Is that the 12 months immediately before, the 12 months immediately after that May range protection law went into effect? You know, I think those are discussions, you know, honest discussions that could be had. There's another point in the ruling that refers to as of 2006. Does that mean anything before 2006? You know, again, I think we could have a discussion about that. And then the ruling closes with a footnote on the last page that refers to circa 2006. So is that 2006 plus or minus a year or two? So the one, you know, consistency obviously there is a reference to 2006, again, whether it's 12 months before, 12 months after, plus or minus a year, whatever the case might be. And as such, with that interpretation, was the reason that we went back and collected essentially the records that we collected from the time period that we collected them from. So again, you guys have the numbers. I would be happy to provide, I'm sure Rick can provide more detail on that, but again, we have every confidence that the records that we found from that time period are accurate and verifiable and essentially represent the flexibility with which the club has to operate going forward.
Thank you. For Bob?
I actually have two questions. One is for Rick, and maybe one's for Bob. But what's pushing us to create an ordinance right now? I mean, is it?
We already have an ordinance.
I'm sorry, to change the ordinance. Well, what's pushing us? Because
The ordinance is not enforceable at all as it relates to regulating noise at the gun club.
Right, I understand that, but, okay, so has the gun club operated significantly outside of what the ruling is? Yeah, I understand it's not enforceable, but as I look at the numbers, and the numbers over the last 6 years, I guess, 6 or 7 events a year, average somewhere in that range, right, between 6 and 7, I think, that's the average. It's half of what it was in 2000 and less than half of what it was in 2006. Is it because we're worried the gun club's gonna significantly increase their special events, and so we feel we need to regulate it? Or I'm just trying to understand why do we have this question coming up to us? Or is it because the gun club is pushing for some clarity from the town?
I
So
think
you're not
we're-
looking for
we're-
anything? Oh, okay, so I'm just trying to understand what caused this to come to us? I'm just,
Actually, the select board asked that it come back because of the decision. It was an unresolved matter. Now, one of the options I listed was to, do nothing or to modify it in a way that basically still leaves the number of special events open. So those are certainly options the board has.
yeah, but if we come up with a number that the gun club doesn't like, we're back to court, probably. I don't know. I don't know what the situation is. Can I just, maybe I can just ask the question, is the number of events that has been going on for the last 6 years, do you anticipate they're gonna be significantly different going forward, or is there a new push to do more events? And
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not doing anything differently in 2018 following the ruling than we did, at any point, whether we want to look at 2005, 6, 7, or 2000, I'll skip 2008 because of the discrepancies, but, or 2009 on in terms of drumming up additional events. I think that where the a discrepancy in the position of the gun club versus the town may come is, okay, let's say in 2019, we get a couple of corporations that want to come out and do a team building event, and the club gets all psyched about hosting some additional competitions that have been well regarded, and a couple of conservation organizations want to host a fundraising fun shoot up at the club, and all of a sudden now we're pushing on 12, 14, 16 special events, or the company that wants to come out and do a team building event wants to do that on a Monday or a Thursday. I think that's where, I don't want to put words in Rick's or anybody else's mouth as to what their position might be on, an increase up into the mid-teens or the flexibility to hold special events on days other than Saturdays. Our contention, frankly, would be that would still be consistent with what was going on in and around 2006 if we were to host that kind of quantity of events or on a schedule that varies from what we've done in the last 5 or 6 years. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. I have a feeling that the town would disagree with that. I'd like to understand that disagreement, because unless you're going to frankly just dismiss the records that we've presented, I think it's hard to argue that that wasn't happening in and around 2006, but perhaps that's the real conversation to have. I don't know.
Bob, do your records do they break it down by month, when the events were held?
I break it down by day.
By day, all right.
Yeah, we have dates for everyone.
Yeah.
How many years back do they go?
I gather 2005, 6, 7, primarily because of the prominent mention of 2006, the baseline versus as of versus circa.
Did they go past 2005?
I would have to go back and look. I think they actually started to get spotty like in 2005. So probably 4, 3, 2, etc. That kind of thing. Frankly, the newsletters, frankly, enthusiasm for writing those kind of waivers, depending on who's in the leadership and whether I have not kept up with it. But
I understand. In these days with electronics.
yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question of the board? I don't know if that's out of order, but I'm kind of looking to understand, you had mentioned, Rick, that one of the purposes of this was to change the noise ordinance so that there was something enforceable of the club and of the noise ordinance, of the noise that the club makes. And in looking at the court ruling, what I think I'm trying to understand is how we have the authority to do that as the town when the court order says that the 2006 amendment was to prohibit municipalities from regulating the discharge of firearms, including regulation of the noise created by that discharge. So I'm just trying to clarify what we're trying to change in the noise ordinance in terms of how it's supposed to regulate the club, and that seems to be against the court order, and I may just be misunderstanding.
Well, paragraph 12 of the Supreme Court decision says, this statute unquestionably limits the town's authority to reduce the permissible use or discharge of firearms at the club below the levels in effect on May 22nd, 2006.
Yep, and I was looking at paragraph 20 just for reference, which
Okay.
basically says the same date.
Yep.
Makes any difference. Yep.
So as I see that, it says that the town has the statutory authority to pass an ordinance to regulate noise if the regulation is consistent with the gun club's use of the property up to May 22nd, 2006.
So that does seem to conflict with paragraph 20 that says the 2006 amendment was to prohibit municipalities from regulating the discharge of firearms, including regulation of the noise created by such discharge in a way that limits and reduces a permissible shooting below the levels established in May 22nd, 2006.
You're talking paragraph 20?
Yeah, 20.
Yep. From this history, we conclude that one purpose of the 2006 amendment was to prohibit municipalities from regulating the discharge of firearms, including regulation of the noise created by such discharge, in a way that limits or reduces the permissible amount of shooting below the levels established as of May 22, 2006. I don't think there's a conflict there at all.
Right, so I was just trying to establish what I thought I understood. I'm not trying to put words in Rick's mouth at all. I was just trying to establish, I thought I heard him say, the purpose here today was to adjust the noise ordinance potentially so that there was a way to enforce the noise ordinance, because today there's no way to enforce the noise ordinance against the club. And that statement seems to be in contradiction to what the court order states. That's what I was asking.
And just so my understanding of this is that the town has the authority to pass an ordinance that regulates the noise as long as that regulation does not conflict with the historical use of it going up to and including May 22, 2006.
So we're looking at the 2006 timeframe and not 1991 or whatever.
Yeah, and actually, I'm thinking it probably makes more sense to look at 2005 and pass that, because I guess I don't know for sure, but it seems to me that in winter months and early spring, you're not going to have as many events anyway. So I was wondering if this.
That's historically true. I mean, when the date-specific information is distributed to you, whenever that may come, and again, I can do that however we feel later.
And the reason I was thinking that is I remember this is a tangential thought. Bear with me, it's 20 seconds. I remember one time in the 80s, the state got in a lot of trouble for not enforcing the speed limits on the interstate according to what the feds wanted, and so they were going to cut back federal funding for the interstates. And so Vermont said, well, okay, we're gonna start doing it the whole year. And look, in the winter, people are only going 55 miles an hour on average on the interstate, 45 miles an hour in a snowstorm. And the feds finally said, that's not what we meant. No. So anyway, and I'm thinking it's kind of, I don't want the gun club to present numbers for up to May 22, 2006, but it's not many, because January, February, and March were bad months.
Well, the ironic thing is actually for this time period, so the 4-H program that I mentioned actually kicked off late fall of 2005.
Okay.
And ran through the winter, actually initially on an every Saturday basis. So
All right.
we can look at the winter of 05, 06 if you'd
All
like
right.
to.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out what we're supposed to be looking at.
I have a statement I'd like to read if I could.
Sure.
On the issue. May I sit down over there?
Please. Just identify yourself, if you would, please.
I'm John Bibber. I'm a 25-year-plus member of the club, former board member. I was on the board during a lot of the controversy over the noise ordinance, so I'm pretty much up to date on it. I had some comments I'd like to read. I'd like to start probably with a little story of an incident that occurred at the club, because I think it kind of defines symbolically the futility of the fight that we've been having. Mike Weaver, our club vice president, who's over here, was at the club. This was a time back, a couple of years, when it was before the Supreme Court decision. And he's doing some carpentry work. Well, Mike donates a lot of time to the club, and he's out there doing carpentry work, and he looks over and he sees a cruiser coming up the road. And a policeman gets out, walks over and talks to Mike and says, "Who's been shooting?" And Mike has no idea what he's talking about. No, he's been there for a while, so it wasn't that anybody had been shooting. So he's thinking about it for a minute, and he said, he grabs his nail gun and goes, bang. That's the kind of nonsense we've been dealing with. You have too tight a noise ordinance, and you have problems that just don't make any sense to anybody. I mean, the club has been operating, we now know, within the limits of the state statute for all these years, since 2006. And yet, we've been out of an agreement, and then we made the agreement, we got out of the agreement, we've had policemen sent in our direction to stop our shooting and so forth. We spent a lot of money and used our resources in order to prove ourselves innocent. We did. And you folks have used a lot of taxpayers' money on poor legal advice, and legal advice that's poor is really expensive anyways, and it's really expensive if you take it all the way up to the Supreme Court, as you well know. And what did it prove? It tried to prove that a town ordinance takes precedence over a state statute. Give me a break. That wasn't good money well spent. That wasn't a project well done, and it has been a very unfriendly situation from what we've experienced, and it wasn't necessary. The state law was pretty clear on all of this. Okay, so I'm going to skip in my statement here, and my copy is here for the record. I'll skip the part about you just read there. I'm not going to say that, but I would like to start with addressing some of the issues that have just been mentioned. I'd like to address some issues in Mr. McGuire's memo to the board. I find fault in both his facts, his data, and his recommendation. The board has been shown a 1991 letter it received from the North Country Sportsman's Club, which declared the existence of the club. It's protecting the club in the state law. Contrary to this memo, this letter contained no mention of days or hours of operation, as he said it did. Mr. McGuire included a second letter not addressed to the board. This one was addressed to club neighbors and defines the days and hours of organized shooting that the NSCS board set in 1991. It is neither a legal statement or a guarantee in perpetuity. Our evidence shows that it didn't define club activity 15 years later in 2006. Also, I really doubt that the Select Board would want to rest an argument on a 1991 letter to our neighbors, considering, among other things, that this would extend the meaning of historical usage back from 2006 way back to 1991. Not a good move. Okay? As I've just stated, the relevant year is 2006, and we have provided evidence, you heard it from Bob, that our board has changed operational hours somewhat from the time of 1991. It changed the Wednesday hours, and it also allowed shootings on weekdays. Okay? I want to point out that several statements from the Vermont State Court ruling contradict data in Mr. McGuire's memo concerning his count of the number of special events. We were arguing about this in 2008. Bob was very clear on this, I thought. But this is almost confusing in the court record because of contradictions in how many we count when we count them. And this is from the court record, paragraph 4. In 2014, the board wrote the club asking to renegotiate the agreement to specifically define the term special event and limit them to 5 or 6 per year. And that doesn't sound what you're just talking about like the right number. The town acknowledged that this would be a limit. That this limitation would result in a reduction of such events from a historic average of 12 per year, and that's in the state. That's in the court language there. So, and if we weren't to comply with this, we were told we would have 1 or 2 special events allowed per year. So contrary to Mr. McGuire's count, the town acknowledged 12 special events per year, but threatened to allow only 2. The court goes on to mention, with a touch of humor, as a practical matter, it's difficult to imagine how a town could compel a private party to enter into a voluntary agreement. And then, of course, the town later, the court later states that the town does not have that capacity. And that leads us back to 2006 and the research we've provided the board for that year. Our records show that the club was active in 2005 and 6. The board had changed its Wednesday hours and exercised more flexibility in schedule special events. This included the occasional use of weekday special events. Other activities were also permissible at that time. In those years, the club members occasionally used the property to train dogs or to pattern their shotguns. Neighbors wouldn't have been surprised back then by a few shots on the property outside of the posted hours. In other words, such activities, as well as the days and hours of shooting, were permissible in 2006. And as the court stated in paragraph 12, this statute unquestionably limits the town's authority to reduce the permissible use or discharge of firearms at the club below the levels in effect May 22nd, 2006. In conclusion, your new ordinance, if it mentions NSCS, needs to accurately define and carefully protect what was permissible in decision-making and in standard practice in 2006. The easiest way to do this is to write the state statute, reference the state statute in your noise ordinance. And if you do this, it probably puts you in the most defensible position relative to your constituents. I mean, you'd be telling them the truth, and you'd have an opportunity to explain to them the limits of the law and what you're dealing with. So that would be my recommendation. The other two recommendations on 1991, throw them out. Recommendation number one, if you want to try and work around it with the language, maybe you can do that. But please do not constrain things more than it needs to be so we're chasing nail guns. Thank you.
So is there any direction we wish to give to staff tonight, or do we need to think about this longer?
So can I ask the difference between weekend events and weekday events in terms of effect on surrounding homeowners? It would just say, maybe I don't understand, but since I don't hear anything from my house, obviously, is it, I would think that weekend events are more disruptive to families than weekday events, and maybe I'm thinking of it wrong. Do we have any, I mean, I guess I'm still trying to get at the reason for the noise ordinance is because the town gets complaints. Is that the reason for the noise ordinance?
Actually, the noise ordinance creation had nothing to do with the gun club initially.
Well, I understand, but there are other reasons for a noise ordinance, but why are we, I'm just trying to understand, what are we trying to get out of this? What are you proposing that we get out of this?
Well, I'm not proposing anything.
Oh.
I've given you some options. What I can say is that when the noise ordinance was being considered to be adopted, again, it had nothing to do with the club. But we were faced with the club existence, and so the intent was to try to protect the club's past use, so that, in other words, protect the status quo.
Yeah. They were there first.
Number of hours of shooting, and so it was determined that the best way of doing that was to enter into an agreement with the club as to the number of shooting hours. And that did work for a few years, but then it was determined it wasn't legal to do it that way. And so that's kind of how.
And again, maybe, gentlemen, I'm sorry, I'm terrible. John told us that the agreement fell apart because we wanted to limit that more?
No.
Oh.
No, we didn't. Oh, well, actually, maybe in a way we did. We weren't talking specific numbers, but we wanted to try to define special event because it wasn't defined at all. We were fine with the Wednesdays, we were fine with the Sundays shooting, but there was never any definition of special event.
Let's not mistake them, numbers have been a big part of this discussion, and there is very little, there's a lot of daylight between us on numbers where there has been at this point.
I'm sorry, I guess I don't understand. I was responding to the question, and
So you said that the intent wasn't to define a number of special events, is
No, well, that's not exactly what I said. No, I said the intent was to define special event, and yes, numbers have to be part of that, absolutely.
That's what they don't. You can define a special event without defining how many times you can have that special event.
To a degree, but isn't it, one of the issues that I keep coming up is if it's every Saturday, it's not a special event anymore.
It was for the
Depends
board,
on how the definitions
it was, again, what was permissible in 2006 was the board was the one who decided what an event was a special event. What we're saying is the ones that are not normally scheduled, obviously. But the definition, and that came to an impasse when we tried to negotiate it, but it was basically permissible for the board to make that decision in 2006, so that's the end of the game.
Well, and frankly, whether the event is special or regular, I mean, aren't we really, isn't what we're really talking about here the volume of shooting? You know, if, you know, I don't want to throw a number out there because I don't think, you know, but for the purposes of illustration, you know, if you say, well, you know, 12 is an average of 1 per month, and we schedule that as a regular event on the first Saturday of each month, well, that's not special. It's scheduled, but the volume is something, I don't know whether the town would live with that or not. I'm not proposing 12 events, but like I say, for the purposes of illustration, that's now a regular event. So I mean, even getting bogged down in special versus not special, I went about the review of the records in the context of volume. Some of those happened to be regularly scheduled Saturday events. Others were special that fell on Saturdays and did not, you know, were not part of a broader program. Others were special and they fell on weekdays that were not part of a broader program at the club. So I recall these discussions about, you know, what's special, you know, how do we define that? But I frankly gone about this more from the standpoint of the volume of shooting in any given time period as opposed to how that was scheduled or what it was part of, or any other definition.
And my emphasis was simply on who made the decision, and who had the right to make that decision, what was permissible. And that language is very clear in the court case.
So I guess I'm still, so the reason we want to put want to update this or change the noise ordinance, there must be a reason. I mean, there's a reason we have noise ordinances for, you know, noise past 9 p.m. or construction past 9 p.m. next to a house because people kept from sleeping, or is there something, are there problems being caused as a result of the shooting that people are complaining to the town about that says, hey, we need...
Well, there were, weren't there?
I'm trying to understand, that's what I'm...
But there were at the time.
2008, 2000?
Whatever, I don't know the time period exactly, but there were at one point. And our ordinance right now is, it states that the gun club is exempt, provided that we have a written agreement. Maybe I don't have the wording exactly right. And of course, we can have a written agreement. Well, we can, but it's not, we can't require it. And therefore, the ordinance says something that's just, technically they're not exempt, but it's an odd place to be as far as the ordinance. So
And it sounds like the gun club, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, you just want basically to have no ordinance whatsoever, no restriction.
Well,
Is that kind of the...
We want the town to comply with the court ruling, however you decide to do that, just as we plan to comply with it on our end. And as I mentioned, so, you know, if you decide to update this noise ordinance, you know, I think that it's clear that some of the numbers or definitions or however we want to talk about how special events have been discussed in the past, you know, I think if the town were to write into their noise ordinance that a gun club within the confines of Williston is allowed 8 Saturday events a year, I don't think that would be in compliance with the noise ordinance. Or, I'm sorry, with the court ruling, with the court ruling.
Yeah, the court order doesn't really talk about special events, does it? It just talks about
My
your
my
operation
interpretation,
in
and that's
2006.
And that's why, as I just, that's probably
So
a better bow to put on what I just mentioned, which is why I've been looking at this more in the context of volume versus special, not special, part of a regular program or not. It's how much shooting was occurring during the relevant time period.
Right.
You know, yeah, that, I get it, you probably wish it wasn't as much as it was, but the fact of the matter is if that's what we were doing in and around 2006, I don't think you can enforce a lower volume of shooting or a more confined flexibility or schedule than what was occurring at that time. And I hope you'll rewrite your ordinance to account for that.
I think
Can
the
I
gentleman being.
touch in on that on the thing? Name's Daryl Montague. I've been a member of the club, well, literally since I was 7 years old, which, God help me, is more than 40 years now.
Just a youngster.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still in that. But the board has to realize something when it comes to all clubs, whether they, not just shooting clubs and whatnot, but they ebb, they flow, and it depends a whole lot on who's running the show and whatnot in any given year. They may have busier years, they may not. The club, they have league that, we used to have, I was a track boy, that was one of my first outside the farm jobs on the thing, I was a track boy up there, okay? So, yeah, it dates back that far, but back into the, I won't admit what year, but literally back into the 60s and 70s, we used to hold the state shoot up there. We had 5 operating track fields, 2 skeet fields, we had track leagues, we had skeet leagues, and we were running 5 scheduled days a week, plus we had youth teams and individual, you keep talking special events or whatever, okay, we could, certain events where there's lots of shooting, how many are there? If we have a corporate thing that comes in, the club has to exist, and if it can make some sideline money by having a thing a corporate event, great. Those we don't necessarily know about until a week or 2 ahead of time. There's also one of the main functions, and I'm involved with at the state level through the Federation of Sportsmen, is we're pushing for more and more education. That's part of half of what we exist for is education. Now, does having a youth team or a class, maybe it's a hunter education class, maybe it's a safe shooting class, maybe it's an operational thing. I mean, those classes can be done, but if somebody's got a private lesson that they want to come on and come and use the club, so how do we, that we don't know about that? It could be next weekend, okay? It could be next Tuesday, okay? Because that's when the people that are looking for it are available. And the board has to realize those kinds of things happen. And the club, because of its existence, because it's there, and frankly, we predate any of that. We were there back in the 50s. It is what it is. I mean, long before many of the houses were ever built, that could, back when that club was, and we were all, in rompers, and that club was truly remote. Williston, I remember a time where Taft Corners, there was a gas station, okay? So, yes, it's a growing community, yes, there's things, but everybody that's moved in that's within earshot of that club knew the club was there, and if they didn't, they should have checked their, before they bought into a house, if that's an issue for them, then perhaps they should have reconsidered before they, and done a little more research before they did. I would never buy a house into an area without checking out the area to establish whether or not it's something that, if there's something going on I'm going to object to, then why would I buy a house there? That's part of the mission of the state is increase education programs. And throughout the state, we're limited on areas because of population and whatnot, on areas that we can do that, and that club offers a safe area to do that. The board's main concern as far as that club should be is for a safety aspect as to whether or not are there any projectiles leaving the property, and the answer is no, nor have there been, nor will there be. We're as safe as it gets up there. Beyond that, We just want to exist. We're actually really good neighbors, and we try to be, especially land use and whatnot. But to list a given number of, you can only shoot on some day, if somebody wants to go up and pattern a shotgun, does that count as an event? He shoots three shots? No. You know, but is somebody gonna hear it? But it's not rounds and rounds and hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammo going off. The nail gun kind of thing, you know, it's over the hill, it sounds the same, yeah. So, how do you define it? And I think that's what your Supreme Court said, you can't adequately define it. So let the club be the club. Thank you.
Can I just make a couple points? I'm Mike Weaver, John referenced me, I've been on the board for, seems like forever. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. Even after the Supreme Court ruling came out, I did want to point out that we have behaved just like we always have in the past. You know, we're still operating with the same hours. We're providing notification to the town. We haven't changed our behavior in any way. And then the notification that has come up several times, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the only people, when we notify you, the only people on the distribution list are the Bhutans who have moved and the police. Is that correct?
The Bhutans, as you said, are not on the list because they moved. So it's the town and the police, yeah. Well,
Okay.
yes.
So we're providing a notification that's kind of going nowhere. And then you brought up the issue of have there been complaints, and to the best of my knowledge, other than the Bhutans, there haven't been.
There haven't been any recent complaints, that's correct.
Okay. And then also just in fairness, pointing out the Bhutans themselves were successfully ticketed twice for harassing our operations by standing there and yelling at us with a megaphone through the woods. It happened for years, and we finally had enough, and the police went there and cited them twice. So, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, that's good information.
I have two questions, hopefully, to help clarify things for me. The first is we're focusing only on events and not on any noise mitigation. Is that correct? I guess I'm asking that as sort of a question out there.
Well, I think the term that Bob used was volume, and I think that's, by that, I think the number of, yeah, number of days, right.
Right, or efforts to try to prevent noise from leaving the property. Not that you're gonna prevent noise from, but mitigating the noise that does leave the property.
Actually, we have a project that's partially completed that will help with that. We have the impact area where the shop hall is. There's gonna be a berm between our property and the adjacent neighbors on Porterwood that will probably be 20 feet high, and that should do quite a bit to get the noise down and the immediate neighbors there. That project is underway. We're just waiting for Ireland to get Phil available.
So just to repeat, to make sure I understand, that the gun club is taking active measurements to mitigate noise through these berms.
Yes, we put in for
Yeah.
grants for noise mitigation in one of
Yep.
our facilities, and which of course
Yeah.
we need to get, but we're still trying.
And then thank you. My second question has to do with, I just want to make sure I understand where the disagreements might be. And it's, the trouble with this issue is that it comes up and then it goes dormant, not dormant, may not be the best word, but we haven't been talking about it, so I kind of forget maybe where we are. It sounds, from what I can tell, it sounds like we're in agreement on the Wednesdays from 4 to 9. We're in agreement on Sundays from 9 to 4. Where we're in disagreement in terms of what was the gun club's practice in 2007 is the number of Saturdays between.
Non-Wednesday and Sunday events.
So you believe it's not just Saturdays, it's non-Wednesdays?
Again,
Okay.
And that's not something we've, although frankly, after interpreting the ruling last year, I think we did have a Friday event last December, and we had a Tuesday or Thursday event within the last month or two.
It was a Thursday event recently.
Yeah. So, that was after reviewing the records from the 2006 time frame where we saw a okay? That's something that has happened historically and would seem to be within our flexibility per the ruling, per our interpretation of the ruling.
Okay.
So I don't expect those to be the preponderance of our events, but, you know, obviously, like I said, those are mostly a corporate team building kind of thing, where a company wants to bug out at noon and take everybody
Sure,
out for a
yeah.
new experience, and, you know, then go to a brewery afterwards.
Well, also to give you some perspective on these corporate events, they'll show up with people that for the most part are novice shooters, and to be honest, they're there to shoot a few targets and get some imagery that they can put up on their social media page, and then, like Bob says, then they want to get on the bus and go on the brewery tour. So they are not high volume shooters.
Okay.
I would just add one thing on the hours. I mentioned that the hours actually have changed between the 1991 letter and what was actually going on in 2006. So I'm making a point that it was permissible to change the hours somewhat. I think what would be impermissible would be to increase the number of hours, like on a Wednesday or something like that, unless there was give somewhere else. So when we're talking about volume, we're really talking about hours when it comes. So I don't want to say that, at least, I'm not talking for the club, but from my point of view, I don't think I want to see the club say, yeah, exactly this way. We would love to have it start earlier on Wednesdays, at least some of us on older retired types would like to start earlier. And if we did, probably wouldn't be going till 9 at night, which was the original 5 to 9. So I mean,
there used to be lights.
Used to be lights. So it's just a reasonable type of thing that we were permitted to do, or had the authority to do in 2006, that we might just want to do now. But again, you're hearing a responsible response to how we do things.
But the short answer to your question, Jeff, is yeah, and I hope Rick would agree with this, that there hasn't in any of these discussions, settlement discussions, pre-ruling, post-ruling, I think it's fair to say there hasn't been any dispute about Wednesdays and Sundays. I mean, Wednesday's been 4 to dusk is the reality. You know, in October that's shorter than it is in July. But it's Wednesday's 4 to dusk and Sunday's 9 to 4.
Just, and I don't, hypothetically, I don't know if that's the right word to use here, if our position becomes, okay, Wednesdays, Sundays, and then and I'm going to use the number from Rick's memo, the number for 2006 of 16, that's in here for those non-Sunday Wednesdays. You may not be thrilled with those, but would you say that those are consistent with the court decision?
That's where I think that if we're really going to get down to that kind of nitty gritty, so to speak.
I'm not suggesting that. I just
just hang with me for a minute. That's where I think it becomes important to say, okay, what is the time period? What's the real time period that we need to look at here? Because that's the one place. I don't think there's a ton of room for interpretation within the ruling. I mean, we got to be looking somewhere around 2006 plus or minus something. You know, I don't think 1991 is relevant. I don't think 2012 is relevant. It's somewhere there in that 2006 plus or minus. And that plus or minus can be important because, as we've seen, I think 2007, one of the years that admittedly is probably better expressed as a range based on the way the events were reported in the newsletters, but it was somewhere between 19 on the low end and 25 on the high end. I mean, there's at least 19 verifiable events. So, you know, if 2007 had to be part of it, you know, would we have to say no to the 17th event? I'm not sure we would, but that would be a great problem for us to have. I mean, you know, so there's, you know, there's a reality to whether that's going to be an issue or not. But like I say, it's, you know, what time frame do we need to be looking at based on the ruling to determine what's permissible going forward?
So what I'm hearing is important to the Gov Club is that they have the flexibility for the non-Wednesday, non-Sunday events. And, you know, the number, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, that's not the right word. It's difficult for us to say there's no limits on those non-Wednesday, non-Sunday events, meaning you could literally have an event every day of the week for a whole year. But the number, as long as that number is reasonable and consistent with the data that is out there supporting what happened in 2006, 7 timeframe.
Ish.
Yeah. You know, your position will be is that's going to be consistent with the court order, and you'll have to live with it, for lack of better words.
Yeah, I mean, you know, to your point, you know, and Daryl actually brought this point up. I mean, the reality is there was a point in time where the club was open for regular shooting 4 or 5 days a week.
Yeah.
I mean, we also realize that's not going to be our reality anymore.
Yeah.
So there, you know, while we're admittedly pushing here for more than the town would probably really prefer to give under a different circumstance independent of this ruling, obviously that's why we didn't have a settlement. You know, we also realize there are some limitations on us as well. You know, I mean, frankly, 30 special events isn't going to be a permissible reality. Again, nice problem to have, but we have neither the capacity nor the demand for that, and we're not going to be open 4 or 5 days a week for regular shooting ever again.
Not in the foreseen, but could it ever happen? Maybe. You know, you don't know. Because the demand, is the demand out there? Will it grow? You didn't think.
Well,
I can't rule out, I mean.
I do think the ruling closes the door on that there, frankly,
Yeah,
but.
It doesn't limit you.
Well, we weren't doing that in 2006. So.
Again, clubs ebb and flow throughout the years. They ebb and flow with who's managing whatever. But I'm not saying Bob does a bad job, but he won't be president forever, because one of these days he's gonna step. You know, and I'm not saying go away. Okay, don't take it. But what I'm saying, you know, at some other point, you know, we had the UVM team standing, you know, coming in and during regular hours, you know, for the foreseeable future on a thing, he's right. It'd be nice problems to have to be running out of hours, okay, for events that are there. But it's totally possible. I'll give you an example. In the interim and during the time period you all were talking, I had moved out of state because of job and career and whatnot. I went out to the Midwest, and whenever we started a youth team, we started with 9 kids. We had 35 so fast it was ridiculous. And literally by the next year we had 35. The state program out there had 19 kids to begin with. Last year they shot 1,200. They had their own matches. They had to step away from the state shoot because they didn't have enough. They had to add an extra day, okay, for those 1,200 kids to step up to the line. That's 1,200 more kids that know the guns aren't for going to rob the bank and whatnot, and for recreational use and whatnot, and that are safe. And how about this? That are really safe with them. We, the shooters of the world on the thing, have a basic standpoint of, you know, if you don't like them, that's okay. If you don't want to come and shoot, don't. But let us do it and do it safely. And will there ever be a time where that club could graduate back to the amount of activity that it had in yesteryear? Anything's foreseeable.
So it seems like the question is whether we want to somehow come to some definition of what happened in 2006, right? May, or, I guess I'm a little unclear how to develop that window, but maybe you say 2006, what you did in terms of hours of shooting, or I guess you'll have to come up with a metric, whether it's days or hours or volume.
Referencing the state statute and the year, circa,
right.
You know, the amount of shooting. I mean, you're gonna hear from neighbors that this, you know, that they're not gonna like the way this is written, probably, because it's different from what was there before, and you need to be explaining the limitations that are on you by that state statute and the courts. And the best reference is, instead of defining it or trying to define it, refer back to the statute itself.
Well, I guess the job on us is to figure out whether our residents expect something more than just, are they going to expect something more? I guess, I was trying to figure out whether we get complaints. It sounds like there was one homeowner who had a big problem, but it's unclear whether anybody else really has a problem. I don't know how close other neighbors are, or,
You can hear it quite a distance depending which way the wind's blowing, but I think we have not, as I said a few minutes ago, any complaints recently. I would guess that if they suddenly tripled their number of shooting hours, then you might start to hear more complaints.
Is there an alternative to allow this to just, as a Williston resident, sorry, my name's Christine Serpio, I do live in Williston, and I am also a shooter at the club, to just let this be for a bit. We're not having complaints, we have no neighbors are complaining, we're trying to stay to the letter of what's written in there. We've presented the records that we have in that 2005, 6, 7 range. I think we verbally said that we agree that's the range area where we're trying to stay. We're not trying to limit to which day of the week any of those events would fall, but a rough number that we've been trying to stay within. Do we just let this flow for a little bit and continue to try to be the good neighbors that I mean, there's been some really great dialogue here tonight, and it feels like maybe we just let this be for a minute, and let's, let the club operate, let us work the way we have, looking at the historical records, making our decisions. We can continue to notify the town, but let's see what happens. Let's see if you get more neighbors before we take a lot of extra time, additional time, and money trying to write something that maybe is never needed. I mean, we don't regulate and put hours and requirements on the snowmobiles that drive, Lake Iroquois in the middle of the winter and the boats that power in the middle of the winter. So we might be trying to go down too deep when we really don't have to. Just a thought.
Thank you.
That is one of the options listed in my list.
I was kind of but I guess I'm the shortest person on the board here, so I've only been here less than 2 years, so I don't have this historical perspective, and I don't live close enough to hear it, even though I've been here for 20-some years. So I'm a little at a loss as to what problem we were trying to solve with the ordinance in the first place. So it sounds like we had some noisy issues for a while. Noisy not in terms of shooting noise, but noisy in terms of maybe neighbors not happy about shooting.
If I may make a recommendation, I don't think we should take any action tonight, but I would like to see if we could, if we could have this come back with, I'd like to see what the data is for 2005 and January 1, 2006 through May 22nd, 2006.
So you can see the same data, but
basically for
specific
18
dates.
months.
Yes, they did provide, okay.
Yeah.
So 18 months of data?
We
Yeah,
have that.
because you said 2005, Bob, is beginning to be a little bit spotty with the newsletters and the primary sources that you have. All right. Yes, I mean, I would like to see that. I don't think we should pass ordinances just to do them. On the other hand, there are speed limits, and you could say, well, why have a speed limit? I don't go 55 miles an hour anyway. I only go 50. Well, it's still probably smart to have a speed limit. So I don't have a problem as a matter of concept having a ordinance. The issue that I have is, we got to make sure that it is consistent with the Supreme Court ruling, and that it's also fair to the club. And I think what I'm hearing is that maybe that's possible. Maybe it's possible to be consistent with the Supreme Court ruling and give the club the room that it needs to continue to operate.
Like I said, from the time the ruling came down, that was our intent of trying to figure out how to go forward. All right, let's understand what the ruling means, and then if we need information, which did, level of activity, again, in and around 2006, however that is best defined, let's figure out what that was, and that's what we.
Yep. And I want to be clear, though, my understanding of this is that the Supreme Court was really specific because it's when the law went into effect was on May 22nd, 2006. And so it says, you know, the town has no power whatsoever to limit or reduce permissible amounts of shooting below those levels established as of May 22nd, 2006. I suppose we could get into, does that mean midnight on May 22nd, 2006?
If we were open on the 22nd, or
what day does midnight belong to? So, but that's what I would propose that we do.
So I think this is a good time to close the discussion for tonight on this and wait for the data to be looked at by us as well.
So the plan is to get 18 months worth of data?
They already have it.
They already have it.
They already,
I
we have
just
it.
wanna see it.
I just didn't think,
Okay.
I mean, frankly, we talked about whether or not we should include it, and I figured the summary version would be enough. But anyway,
So it includes,
we have it.
it includes dates and times, so if we're talking about
Dates.
volume,
Dates anyway.
oh, it's just dates. Because a special event could be an hour, or a special event could be a day. So if you're talking really about having the same volume of shooting, you kind of want to know.
If we can get that information, yes.
Yeah,
Get what we can get.
okay.
Yep.
All right, that's fair.
I will say, we can get this tomorrow, but the next time we're gonna be able to talk about it is probably sometime in January.
Because of budget.
we've got
Budget season.
a heavy schedule already for the meetings in December.
Good thing is it doesn't, well, the good thing is it seems like it's not really a resident problem right now, at least.
Right, I
We
mean,
don't
given
have a
the
problem.
levels the club's operating right now, it's not
Not a pressing problem.
One final clarification, when we were talking about the lack of complaints, actually, that also extends to the recent Friday and Thursday event. There was nothing that was brought to your attention as far as a concern from the residents of the town about that?
Oh, no, but I wasn't aware there was a Friday event.
Last year, I brought find the notification.
Okay, maybe I may have looked at it and thought it was a Saturday.
December last year.
All right, I may have looked at it and thought it was a Saturday and didn't even register that it was a Friday event, so. But anyway, I didn't get any complaints about it, so.
Thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Move on to the liquor license application. This is for a change of owner, as I recall it, Rick.
I've got notes on that.
Was it yours?
Yep, we're just,
Eric, you okay?
Bose Southwest Grill, name change, ownership change from Taft Food, it's being changed to Taft Foods from its current name of Torchwood LLC. Planning department, police department have no issues with this. Nothing would change at the restaurant. It's just an LLC ownership name, so we have to have a new liquor license in place. And
No
there's
violations, no issues,
no more raise, and it has an outdoor consumption permit with it.
basically moving the license from the old name.
Nothing changes.
That is Bogus names.
So a motion would be in order for that.
A move to grant a first-class liquor license and outdoor consumption permit to Taft Foods LLC, doing business as Moe's Southwest Grill through April 30th, 2019.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Moving on to the approval of the Judicial Bureau list, and this is pretty much self-explanatory, but I think there was a memo that, or it came out in the manager report. This is just a pro forma type of thing to make sure that we have everybody listed that needs to be listed to issue tickets.
Oh, so that's what that's for.
Yes,
I didn't
had no
understand
idea.
what it was for.
I didn't either.
So it wasn't self-explanatory.
Maybe not.
I'm glad I'm not the
Although I
only
should have figured it out when I saw all the police officers listed.
Yeah, I noticed that too, but
Yeah.
there were
Can we
others.
put anybody on this list?
What's that?
Can we put anybody on this list?
Well,
I'd like to, you know,
Rick's
take
on
a
it.
shot at it.
Deb Beckett's on it.
So Deb can issue a ticket?
Well, the Judicial Bureau actually handles more than just speeding and traffic tickets. It does like noise violations.
I can just see Deb out there with a gun, you know,
But this
speed
doesn't
gun.
distinguish what they can and cannot do. Oh, yeah, I guess it does. Yeah. Wow, well, interesting. So I would move to approve the Vermont Judicial Bureau designation of municipal officials as presented.
And there's a second. Discussions on the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to manager's report.
All right, lots of things to talk about tonight. First off, there is the financial report for the period ending through the end of October. Let's see. I don't think there's anything particularly noteworthy, other than we are still continuing to lag somewhat behind on expenditures, although not as much as we did last fiscal year. And we just did get in the local option tax report, which was quite a bit higher than we anticipated, particularly in local options tax. I can't figure out how there was such a huge jump from one year to the next and taking the same quarter, because it was like a $20,000 difference. And I don't know. Our restaurants in town and hotels must have been really busy during that time period. So, well, that's good news for the town as far as revenue goes. So I don't have anything else to highlight on the finance report. If there's any questions, I'll take them, otherwise I'll move on. Yeah. While we're on the subject of finance, I'm sad to announce the impending departure of our finance director. She has been with us a little over 2 years now, has done a wonderful job, as well liked by all employees, and we are obviously very sad to see her go. She is taking a position that's a good opportunity for her at Champlain College, and the good news is that she will continue to work with us during the interim period. She will be at a number of select board meetings, helping to present the budget. She will, of course, work to prepare the budget. We still have that work to do between now and December 4th, which is when we'll be distributing the budget. And then we'll have meetings into January too. And so she's committed to not just helping with that part, but also taking care of the other major things that we have no one else to handle. And there are some items. So we're looking forward to that. We will be paying for her time when she comes back and works beyond those, after she leaves our employment. But so that will definitely be appreciated. Eric, do you want to just touch briefly on the budget engagement survey that you're undertaking?
Yep, we, if you remember last board meeting, we talked about public engagement to get an idea of doing a survey to find what engagement methods the public would welcome this budget process. Short survey's been online for a week and a half. I'll leave it up through this week. Have about a little over 50 responses so far. Left some topic areas like tax revenue, service levels, capital budgeting. People generally interested in all these areas we put out there, and listed some methods that we could consider, and the leading ones are hearing some short videos and some online outreach of these topics. So I'll explore those with staff in the next few weeks and work to roll this out in conjunction with the FY20 budget process.
Cool. Any questions for Eric? Moving on to the next topic, the Chittenden County Regional Public Safety Authority. Recently, the fire chief for the city of Burlington prepared a status report for the city council in Burlington, and I included a copy of that because it's a really good summary, and I know other towns are planning to use his summary as well as to update their boards. The main piece of this is that the board has recently agreed to engage the services of a firm that will begin to gear up the operation of the facility. And they will actually help run the facility once the services are starting to be provided. And there's lots of questions that need to be answered between this point that we're at now and when we're operational. And when I say operational, the intent is not to have all the communities up and running all at the same time. We're going to be phasing the number of communities. Williston will not be one of the first. So,
Again, it's going to be,
regional dispatch.
right, where is it going to be though, physically?
The location we've selected is in the police station, well, it's above the police station in South Burlington.
So where the Public Works is as well? Or is that a different location?
Different location, that's on Patchen Road, and this is over off Kimball.
Oh, it's off of Kennedy Drive, Ranger Road.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's hidden.
Yep. Actually behind ECI or kind of back,
Yeah, sort of.
yeah.
Anyway, progress is being made, and as I said, this is a good summary of all the different things the authority's been working on. I've already mentioned the local option tax report. There's a couple other items that are not in my written report I wanted to touch on. One is one of our new recruits for the police department just graduated this past Friday from the police academy, Sarah Bell. She was either at the top of her class or within a point or two of being the top of the class. So we're very proud of her, and we're thrilled to getting a step closer to having her work as one of our officers on the streets. Another item which I actually distributed this evening, it's kind of an outline, it's called Substance Abuse Prevention Forum. I put this together quickly just to kind of as an outline for what I anticipate will be a forum sometime next year, next calendar year. Already have a number of people that have offered their help putting this together. And we're looking for maybe some grant funding if we have some extra expenses. So there's a number of people that are excited about this. And so anyway, this is just kind of a very preliminary outline. I wanted to share that with you. And then finally, I think I mentioned in a recent manager report that we had a meeting with Global Foundries, talk about a variety of different issues. One of the issues that they brought up at the time, but didn't want it public until now, is that they are considering selling their properties in Williston. Right now, they lease them out to other companies, and so they just don't feel the need anymore to maintain that as Global Foundry property. And so their plan is to sell all of the land and buildings in Williston. So I'm not sure what that is going to mean long-term, but that is, that's part of their plan. And that's all I had for this evening, unless there's something I didn't touch on that.
You were going to respond to the health insurance.
Which I did. Yeah, there's a written, I didn't bring it
Oh,
up.
okay, you didn't want to talk about it?
Well,
or-
we're running late on, but if the board wants to, I'd be happy to talk about it.
I can read it offline if nobody else is interested. I'm just curious. I just want to make sure that, you know, when we're always looking at competitive pay, which we want to do, but we should look at competitive benefits as well. And the
We do.
package is really a combined package, right?
Well, in my memo, we had an example just recently that illustrates that perfectly. We hired an individual for our public works crew who is taking, I forget the numbers, at least a $5 or $6 pay cut. I guess the business pays $23, $24 an hour, and we're at maybe $17 an hour. The difference is benefits. The employee, this person that we're hiring did the math, literally, and found out that the value of our benefits means that he's not going to take much of a pay cut because the benefits that are offered by his business are nowhere near what we offer. And so that gave us an advantage enough to hire this person.
Right.
So, and traditionally, that's one of the things municipal pay for a lot of positions has always been low compared to private business. That isn't true for all positions, but some positions it is. And particularly years ago, that was more the case than it is now. And so municipalities traditionally have had a very rich benefit plan to somewhat offset the low wages. Again, that's not totally true now, because a lot of our positions are competitive, but, you know.
So I'll look at it just to see if it's consistent, maybe it'll be a topic for the future, so.
During the budget discussion.
Yes, exactly. Yep, thanks for the data.
All right, so that's all I had this evening.
Before we go into executive session, is there any other business we need to talk about tonight?
Well, just one thing on the electric vehicle charging station grant.
Yeah.
Behind the idea, I think it's good. Is the town considering getting an electric vehicle? No, okay.
You know, we years ago, we had one that we were leasing, I think, from the state, and it just didn't work out well for a lot of reasons. But the primary thing, and I don't know, Matt, were you around when we had that? No, okay, it was your predecessor. The thing is that we just didn't have enough use to warrant the cost of a separate vehicle or even leasing a vehicle. You know, in other words, it was cheaper to pay mileage than it was to actually have a vehicle.
Yeah. Okay.
So if there's no other business, then we do have two items to discuss in executive session. I would request that you make one motion to cover both of the executive sessions, so we don't have to come out of executive session and go back into it.
I'd move to enter into executive session under provisions of 1 VSA Section 313 to discuss legal strategies concerning the appeal filed by Mr. DeVita of a Development Review Board decision where premature knowledge would place the town at a substantial disadvantage, and to invite Mr. McGuire, Mr. Wells, and Mr. Belanger to attend, and further move to enter into executive session under the same provision to discuss legal strategies concerning possible litigation between the town and the Essex Alliance Church, where again premature knowledge would place the town at a substantial disadvantage, and invite Mr. McGuire and Mr. Wells to attend.
Second.
Is there a discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're in executive session and we'll be done.